Mike Ekeler leaving Tennessee. And let's develop this into a poll question on YouTube in some shape, form, or fashion. But Mike Ekeler leaving Tennessee, let's say, is big, a loss. We're good.
Of those three, you got me leaning towards we're good. And I get it.
I thought I was going to be alone. What are you doing? That's what happens when news breaks after our 3:45 a.m. production meeting. Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought, and then we're just going to have to coincide.
Yeah, well, okay, and here's why. And you guys can correct me on this, but with some very few exceptions, I mean, I don't place a lot of value on a special teams coordinator. You can tell me, Dave, if that's just a title sometimes for a recruiter, or some people are actually like, you know, or if there are people that really go all in trying to be the best special teams coordinator possible. I know when Derek Dooley was called out for not being a ball guy one time, he's like, "Well, I was a special teams coordinator." like that means something.
Okay, you know the one. It's funny. You're going to date me, okay? But the one person I look back at over the years, was a guy named Joe Alzano. Maybe somebody can help me there. And we're going to get into the loss of Ekeler because there's no question he was the heart and excitement piece of this coaching staff. But I think it was Joe Avizano. Maybe somebody can help me on the message board.
Oh, Joe Avizano. Yeah, I know Joe Avizano.
Okay. I do think he made Billy Bates and Farragut into a special player. He put him in the right spot. I do think that their kickers were tremendous. I don't know if he delegated that or not, but there was a long time where they would have a kicker, and I don't want to just reference Cowboys because I know them, but they would have a kicker for 1 or 2 years, then his contract would be up, and they'd get another one. I don't really know who their kickers were for that span of years, but he was a guy that I think Mike Ekeler probably wanted to be. Caleb, so if you ask me a special teams coach or a great position coach, which I know he coached outside linebackers, and that was pretty questionable as well.
Like two players.
Yeah, really one. I mean, if you think about it, T-Lander and Peely played in the box. I have trouble thinking of this as a loss, other than here's the one reason I do think it's a loss. He was a guy that people gravitated. I'm sure you remember Trooper Taylor. He was a very excitable guy. The difference is Trooper Taylor knew how to coach running backs. He knew how to coach receivers, and he was in line to be an offensive coordinator. Does anybody think that about Mike Ekeler? And I do not want to say that just because he's gone, he's a bad coach. I don't want to go there, but do you see at least what I'm kind of driving at?
Oh, I totally do. And, you know, he's, I mean, it doesn't hurt that he's got a pretty good looking wife too.
I wasn't aware of that, nor was I aware that Caleb scouts out the
assistant coaches' wives.
Yeah. WAGs, girlfriends of, anyway, I don't know the acronym, but I didn't know he had a hot wife. He's a good looking guy.
Not Layla Kiffin hot, okay, but like still pretty good looking. Also Layla Kiffin was super young, so that's a little of an unfair advantage. But anyways, getting back to the point, yes, that is part of it. By the way, quick Joe Avizano trivia since you brought him up. Did you know he was Johnny Majors' first offensive coordinator when Majors took over at Tennessee?
I absolutely did.
Yeah, he was the brains behind Jimmy Streeter, of all people.
I look at Ekeler, and I understand why he's a fan favorite. I get that because he's excitable. But at the end of the day, those don't win you a lot of games. And at the end of the day, let's take a look at what he did just in terms of a special teams coach, because we can pull that up pretty easy. And his stats are going to be right there. So let's do that. Give me 30 seconds. The show represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks and Jones. T. Scott Jones. Now, before we say just anybody could coach special teams, let's give Ekeler his due. And I want to go to the message board and you tell me what you think. Tennessee was, for the record, number 1 in punt returns last season. 15.7. That's almost a full point better than Vanderbilt. That was number 2. Okay, so let's go with kickoff returns. Kickoff returns, Tennessee, not as good. 20.71. That ranks 5th in the SEC. All right, we can go a little further. How about a little kickoff coverage and a little punt coverage? But first, before I get to that, what do you think of those numbers? Are they better than you thought or not quite as good as you thought?
No, they're right where I thought they were. I knew they were pretty good on returns, particularly punt returns. But, you know, Dave, covering special teams now, for the amount of time I've been doing it, I feel like that has a lot more to do with who you have back there than the coaching. I mean, I got to be honest. I mean, last year they had Boo Carter returning punts, and he was a heck of a punt returner. The other part is these rankings on special teams are really small sample sizes because so nowhere near as many punts or kickoffs are returned as were 15 to 20 years ago.
Okay, very true. And I want to get to that whole notion that special teams, the kicking game, is a third of game. No, it's not. Do the math. By the way,
yeah,
Tennessee,
it's not.
No, it's not. Opponent punt returns, 6.7. That's 9th in the SEC. All right, and I know we're judging Ekeler here, but that's the way things go. Opponent kickoff returns, Tennessee's 12th. So to me, and that's at about 22 yards per return. And I know the game's changed, but to me, they lost an average special teams coach and an excitable, likable guy. Are you supposed to pay to keep something like that when you have to pay to keep Tim Banks? You're going to have to eventually pay. I think you're going to have to pay Rodney Garner some more money. You're going to have to pay a lot of guys on this staff. Now, maybe you save money because you've got an offensive staff that's thrown together by basically interns. But on the defensive staff, it's hard for me to look Garner or Banks in the face and say, oh, this guy's making ballpark to you based off his production. That, to me, is something that would not sell in the locker room.
Let's call this what it is, actually. You just brought it up, and I just looked it up. And I forgot we did this segment, Dave. But remember last month we talked about the 3 coaches who have expiring contracts at Tennessee?
Mm-hmm. And Ekeler, Garner, Banks.
Yep. Eckler's contract expired officially on January the 31st. He made this, which was on Friday. He made this move today. What does that tell you? His contract expired, and the coaches were like, we don't really need to renew your contract.
Well, I think a little bit of both. I think that he wanted to get closer to home to Nebraska. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for that. We all make different moves. Like you live in Baltimore, but maybe if you want to be closer to your parents and where they live in Tennessee, I couldn't begrudge you that. Fortunately, we could do the same thing. But with Banks, you can't lose him as a coordinator. With Garner, you can't lose him as a defensive line coach and recruiter. With Ekeler, I don't think you're sweating bullets.
You're not, and you got to pinch some pennies. What's going to be more expensive, losing Ekeler or maintaining Ekeler, or just promoting an off-field assistant into that role? I mean, you're probably going to get a much better deal on that guy, and more importantly, it's not that crucial of a job. You're coaching one linebacker, and again, special teams is kind of special teams coordinator it's a title. That's really all it is, in my opinion, nowadays, given how few kickoffs are. Back in the day, special teams coordinator could be a thing. You're right, because Alan Lowry was the Titans special teams coordinator, and he was a genius. He's the one who drew up the Music City Miracle play. I mean, you don't do that anymore on kickoffs. You don't do that anymore on punt returns or punt coverage or anything like that, because there's just not enough of them. So you don't waste your time thinking about that. And I know you brought up Joe Avisano, but most of the time, there's nobody actually coaching the kickers. You could just either kick or not. So,
well, he had a guy named Deion Sanders returning it.
Yes.
So that was okay. That was a pretty good deal.